Delighted to be joined today by Martin Richards. Martin, sir, how are you?
I'm well, Nick. We're just batting down the hatches here down in Devon because it's Storm Eunice, and everybody's panicking. And like you said, it's a red warning, and we don't know what that means. But anyway, so
listen, maybe that's a good place to kick off, I suppose. Listen, you spent 30 years in the Met. Obviously, no 2 days were the same. Dealing with kidnappings, firearms, terrorists, all manner of different things. How do you prepare for the unknown, the unexpected?
I think what you did, not just about preparation. I think what you rely on is your experience, what you've got, and also the belief in what other people, the fact that other people believe in you. I remember I had my own crisis of confidence around whether I had the ability to do the job when I was deployed to Iraq on a kidnapping case. And I vividly remember walking to my very first meeting to meet the ambassador in the embassy. And I stopped in my tracks and thought, can I actually do this? And I fell back on those two things. I thought, well, and at that stage, I had about 20 years in the police. And I thought, well, I've got surely enough generic leadership experience in order to get through that first meeting. And also, would people actually send you all that way to deal with such a critical incident if they didn't believe you had the ability? So it's those two things which got me through that first meeting, if you like.
So you touched on it, it's something that's always interested me, the concept of crisis, and especially in the times we're living in today. Do you believe it's a learned skill, or do you think it's something that someone innately has, their ability to manage pressure, crisis, and stay calm?
I think it depends what the crisis is. I mean, all crises throw out stress, they throw up anxiety, they throw out what we just talked about, this crisis of confidence. Can you do it? I mean, any crisis, you've got the element of surprise, you get that siege mentality, your thought processes are clouded because of the stress. And what training can do is it can give you structures, it can give you the knowledge to get through these crises. I mean, in the negotiating world, we have if you like, a conversation structure that we stick to around building up empathy before we influence. And if you've got those structures to hang on to, like a decision-making structure, for example, as well, then in times of stress, that's what gets you through. I mean, pilots have checklists. I mean, surgeons have checklists. Because when you have that crisis, because you're clouded, because of the stress, you can't think straight, you get overwhelmed. And so you need those structures to get through. So in answer to your question, is it innate or is it nurtured? Do you learn it? I think it's a bit of both, because you've got to have that generic, if you like, ability to think quick, to think laterally, to be alert in situations. So there's a bit of both probably. But if you don't have the training and if you don't have those structures, then I think you'd be found wanting.
So you mentioned Iraq in the first answer, and you mentioned communication the second. Again, like in a workplace now, we're dealing with multi-generational workplaces. We're dealing with people in different areas. We're dealing with people with different backgrounds. How much did you, when you're dealing with people in kidnapping cases or something like that, how much did culture and backgrounds affect your communication to different people, and how would you understand who they were when maybe you didn't know on a piece of paper who they were?
Well, trust is important in my field. I mean, I have to convince, for example, families in Nigeria, completely different culture to Western culture, particularly Southwest Devon, for example, in England, in the Southwest. I mean, here am I fly into the depths of Nigeria, into places like Port Harcourt, where I speak to a local family and I have to convince them that here I am and I know everything there is to know about kidnapping in Nigeria. Now, I never underestimate how difficult that is, whether it's cultural, whether it's language, because I switch it around and imagine that, let's say that my wife was kidnapped and I had somebody from Nigeria come into my house to explain to me how to manage kidnaps in London, and then telling me that they know everything there is to know about kidnaps in London. Now, what am I going to think? Of course you do, sarcastically. And so I never underestimate how difficult that is to build that trust, because the cultures are completely different. And so when dealing with these different cultures, there's a huge amount of patience that's required. And also a huge amount of empathy, because you've got to try and understand what you're dealing with in that culture. I mean, dealing with kidnappings in Iraq, for example, and, before every conversation, before we even got into dealing with the kidnappers and negotiation at what stage we were at, there was a lot of preamble around families and how the families were, and asking about, their lives, and before we even got down to business. So it was the way that conversation had to go every single time. We wanted to get down to business because that's what we were like, and this was our culture, this is why we were there. But we just knew that we couldn't get into that conversation before we had all those other conversations. So yes, it does affect negotiations and it does affect my world, but the word I'll repeat to you is patience. And that getting that understanding of what you're dealing with before you start talking about your business.
So the word, let's explore patience for just a couple of minutes. Balancing up kind of in a world that is so fast moving, in a world where we are under time, all of us feel under this time pressure, and kind of having to make decisions quickly because the world's moving quickly, having to make decisions in your world, probably having to make decisions quickly because you are dealing with people's lives at stake. How do you balance up? How do you keep yourself patient and kind of in that calm state of mind against the fact that probably there's external pressures going on all around you over the fact that you have to move this forward?
Well, we emotionally label other people when we're dealing with people in a crisis for many reasons, but we do that to ourselves. So it's to recognize when we turn up at a crisis, yes, we're going to feel anxious. Yes, we know everybody's looking at us. Yes, we need to get this sorted straight away. I mean, a high-end example might be, for example, a suicide intervention where somebody's going to jump off a high building. Now, we know we've got to solve that pretty quickly and build up that rapport almost instantly to try and influence that person not to jump off that building. And so when we talked about the patience, and we need to know we've got to slow that down, is we label what we're going through ourselves to understand what we are feeling. And so we call it out, if you like, mentally. So recognize the fact that now I'm actually anxious in talking to this person. I'm actually worried about what might happen. I'm actually worried that I haven't got much time. So I will have that internal dialogue with myself. Now, once it's out there, once I understand how I am feeling, I can then deal with it internally. And then that can slow me down, make me less overwhelmed, and then I can start thinking more rationally. Because we're all human beings. It doesn't matter how much training we've had, we're still going to have those feelings. There is no difference.
So let me just ask you briefly, the world of speaking, and you turning to speaking. How is it for you? What part of it do you enjoy the most? What are you trying to give your audience so they have something tangible from someone who kind of works at the extreme versions of what crisis is, I suppose?
Well, it's bringing it into their world is what's interesting for me. I mean, it's been proven that hostage and crisis negotiation skills has been proven to work in the business environment. But it's also relating that to stories to make it, again, you can make it humorous as well. I mean, I not only do I enjoy giving knowledge, but I enjoy the humor behind it. I mean, you ask any paramedic, anybody from the fire brigade or anybody from the police and emergency services, there's that dark underlying humor, which often gets you through those crises. So there's that world as well. But there's also, yes, it's proving to people that these skills are transferable. Now, we did a lot of free webinars during lockdowns. And the reason for that, and you would see yourself, all of the pieces of advice that came out in magazines and newspapers and in the media to how can people cope with lockdown? How should people cope with lockdown? This is the best thing you can do. It's exactly the same as the advice that we used to give hostages.
Right.
There is no difference, because when you're in lockdown or when you are a hostage, all your basic needs are stripped away from you. You have no certainty, no control, you don't feel safe, your health is affected. Exactly the same as us in lockdown. And all the psychologists and trauma psychologists were telling you things like make sure you get a routine, make sure you don't drink too much and you stay healthy, get yourself some exercise, make sure the relationships in your family are still harmonious and you don't get into too many fights. And so what we say to hostages is make sure you eat the food the kidnappers give you, don't antagonize your kidnappers, get yourself a routine. And it was exactly the same advice. And what those psychologists will tell you is those that get back the basic needs when they're in captivity, then they will suffer from far less post-traumatic stress when they come out of captivity. And that's the reason why psychologists were giving you that advice in lockdown, because you would recover quicker if you got back those basic needs.
Martin, thank you so much for your time today. Always fascinating, and always love the tantalizing stories you've always got to tell us. I appreciate it, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Stay safe in the storm.
Yeah.